Good morning, everybody. I hope I am on the right thread. Kirsten, can you be the only one logged on Wednesday? Am I early or did I screw this up? I'm going to go ahead and say good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Ribbon Candy Hooking. I'm Deanna. Kirsten, let me know if I am live. I'm starting to have serious doubts. There we go. I think I'm good. Aileen, great to see you in Toronto. No snow. Wasn't that crazy? The forecast all over the place was like really crazy for yesterday. Good to see you. Do we have two buddies on today? Is that possible? Am I on at the right time? Let me know if I'm live. Just let me know. I'm going to gather my things for a minute. I feel like I might have screwed something up here. I hope I am truly logged on. I know there's a delay, so I will wait. It's 12:02, right? It is 12:02. I am so confused right now. You can see live. Okay, great. There's not buddies on today. It must be a beautiful day. Here we go. Karen, happy Wednesday. I was getting nervous. I always assume it's me that's done something terribly wrong. Well, good morning and welcome back. It is great to see you. We are concluding the episode today on It Does Seem Strange. It is the correct time. Great. Well, we'll do it. And you know, it's recorded for later. It is a beautiful day today. And many people are, I'm sure, on vacation like my kids are. Lynn, good to see you in sunny, warm Tucson. So I think people are just having a good old time out there. I hope so. Beverly, good morning. There we go. Crystal, hey, hey. You know, this reminds me of the bingo night thing. Remember on bingo how somebody got it. Somebody got the card this last Friday night, but there was no one logged on at least who could comment, you know, with a Google account. And for that reason, it got all screwed up. But it's reminding me of that. I'm having a terrible flashback. I'm just getting my stuff together because I want to show you what I was working on this morning before we go into our commentary. Link is not working. Okay, thanks, Kirsten. We'll fix that link. Cindy, great to see you. Karen, great to see you. Joyce, great to see you. The link is not working. That is so aggravating. Yeah, Kirsten, if you're able to cut and paste it, that would be great. I'm sorry about that. You all are really good for finding it. I wonder what happened. I wonder what went wrong this morning. I'm very glad you're there. I will get started. You know, I'm going to conclude, I'm going to do a conclusion episode today we were talking about fine art on Monday because we are gearing up, at least locally, for a fairly large group of us to go to the Florence Griswold Museum on Friday, where I will come on live. And not for coffee time, but as soon as it makes sense, right? Because our appointment is at 11, to look at the Bed Rugs and Quilts exhibit. And as I've said before, this is a really big deal because it has been decades since we have seen, at least in New England, a bed rugs exhibit. And, you know, there are not that many known bed rugs out there at all, period. So having a lot in one place to look at is a really big deal for us. I will document this thoroughly for those of you who aren't there with us on Friday. But in the meantime, there's so much history, Impressionist era painter history that's associated with the House Museum where this exhibit is taking place. And that's what I was doing on Monday. I was talking about the artists that are associated with the Old Lyme community at the Florence Griswold House in Old Lyme. And I'm going to conclude that conversation today. But in the meantime, I was working on a couple of bed rugs because how can I not, right? How can I not? Now, I'm not going to make a bed rug the size of a bed rug. That would be extraordinary. Just heard this morning. Oh, Lynn says, just heard this morning that, oh, you're kidding. Briggs and Little Woolen Mills is dealing with COVID. Okay. Prayers for all, indeed. Okay. Yeah, I'll send a message out there. Delayed shipping. Good to know. Thank you so much for passing that on. Luckily, I mean, just so you know, I get all my Briggs and Little material from the Maritime family in Maine. I always write to Lacey at the Maritime family. It's a family business, and they carry Briggs and Little. And I always get it through them because I have a wholesale account. But for anybody who wants Briggs and Little, in case she's more stocked up than, for example, Briggs and Little themselves at this time, when you get a minimum amount with the Maritime family, they will give you the wholesale price. So you don't have to be a wholesaler with a tax ID number or anything like that. You just get X amount, and it's I don't want to say the amount because I'm not sure I remember, but I remember it's a remarkably low, small amount. So if you're struggling with supplies right now and you need to get some wool yarn dyed, you might want to check with them if Briggs and Little needs a little, that was tongue twister, breathing room. Kirsten, did you get it back up so it's available to all? Thank you so much. That was terrible. I'll have to fix that later for people who come home at night and try to log on to that link. Caroline, great to see you. Heidi, great to see you. Tara, great to see you. I know that is, I'm very happy that we passed that along though, because for people who are waiting, it's so easy to get impatient when businesses are slow. And there's so many reasons that one might be slow these days. That is the number one for sure. Um, okay, thank you so much. Kirsten, you are a lifesaver. So I was working on some bed rug designs, and I'm making at least two. I put out two patterns this morning. One of them, I only got time to get one going this morning. The link is there. It's called the Elizabeth Foote Rug. If you remember from our segment when we were looking at bed rugs, it was a cocktail time episode, I think. Elizabeth Foote did, I don't want to say many, but she did several. She was a prolific bed rug maker. So I did one of hers, right? These are all copyright free, so you can draw them yourself if you'd rather do that. I draw them very literally, right? So depending on the pattern maker, the design company, Ribbon Candy Hooking likes to do things absolutely literally, because for me, my feeling is, let me show you the Elizabeth Foote first. For me, my feeling is while I'm hooking it or punching it, I'm going to be hooking these, at least one, maybe I'll punch one, hook one. My feeling is if my hands aren't following those exact lines that, for example, Elizabeth Foote followed in the 1700s, then for me, what's the point? I really want to recreate this haunting kind of moment where I'm doing exactly what some woman did centuries ago. So I am very literal. I take out a little bit of the noise in the background, not this noise pulling the fiber tape off. I just want to show you the pulling the fiber tape off. So this is the Elizabeth Foote pattern, and I have it colored upside down on the Ribbon Candy Hooking site right now. It's fairly symmetrical. It looks totally symmetrical. It's not. I have it available as a pattern, right? Not a kit at this moment. It would be a colossal kit. It's not impossible. I would recommend if you're going to do this kit and you're a puncher, that would be a lot easier, I think, to put together on my part. But I can bring these out as possible kits. At the moment, they're available as patterns. So this one is, I would say, 20-something by 20-something. I forget. It says it on the Ribbon Candy Hooking site on this link. And I love that. Lynn says, okay, I guess I'm being silly, but what exactly do you do with the bed rug? So, Lynn, a bed rug, historically, it's an old-fashioned word that we have not used forever. It was literally a rug that you would put on the bed for warmth at night, like a full-size rug. And you would either make it sewing or hooking. So some of the later bed rugs are like really early examples of hooking, but most of them, as far as we know, are sewn and not hooked. But they have a very high pile of loops, and many of them were done by pulling it up with a needle and putting a stick through like a little chopstick. They had a little tool for this, and looping around it and bringing the needle back down and pulling the stick out. So you would end with a row of loops. You do a few at once, like over this little chopstick, and pull them out, and they would make loops in wool that look exactly like rug hooking. But until you look at the back of the textile, and then you see the way the channels are, the formation of the stitches, you see that it's sewing and not hooking. So there's a lot of crossover between the bed rug, which is like the grandmother to the hooked rug. So they were literally rugs for the bed, not super hygienic, but a thing of warmth in the early American days. And there's a very small amount of known bed rugs, right? Because they were super laborious and you would need to have a lot of scrap material to make one in the first place. So this exhibit that's coming up in Connecticut that's on, that we're going to on Friday with our group that's here, I'll be documenting that a lot in our group for you to see, and I'll be posting pictures on Ribbon Candy Hooking in case you're not on Facebook. But this is a really important collection because we are looking at the closest and earliest form to what we do. And because there's so few of them in existence, there's going to be a lot in one place. It's quilts and bed rugs in this exhibit. So it's super exciting. This is exactly what Elizabeth Foote's bed rug looked like. It's the same shape anyway, but much smaller, because this would have been the size in real life of like a modern like king. Because these were big canopy beds that were quite high up, right, with lots of stuffing and feathers. They were quite high up, and the bed would reach the ground. So, or even, sort of extra material on the ground. They were huge. So I'm not making them full size because that would be astonishing. So that was the first one I did, and this is the other one I did. This is one that you might recognize. Remember when we did the cocktail episode on Margaret Araj of Mill River Rugs in Massachusetts? She did a cover of, as if we're doing musician stuff, this rug. And I know people were asking her for her patterns, not necessarily this one, but others, and she doesn't do patterns anymore. And I said to her, listen, I'm working on some bed rugs too because of this event that we have coming up. I don't want to step on your feet. And she said, no, it's a rug from the 1700s, and she doesn't sell patterns anymore. I did a slightly different version of it because I have to be really OCD true to the original. So mine will look a little bit different, but wow, this is a hard one to get because it's huge. This one's much bigger. And again, the measurements are on the Ribbon Candy Hooking site, but this one is called Flowerpots. And the real prestige with this, it's got these big cabbage flowers, very nondescript cabbage flowers around the border. But the prestige with this one are these 3 flower pots, because that is super, I think, unusual to see in a composition from the middle late 18th century, right? So I decided with this, I'm going to start working on this tonight if I get a breath. I decided to take out some of my challis, like remember wool challis scarves that people used to love to wear in the 80s? It's thin, but I'm just going to work part of the composition in my challis. I've got these Oilily scarves. Heidi, did you know Oilily? From the Netherlands anyway. It's a brand over there. Some of them are cotton, some of them are wool. This one is wool, and they're just beautiful big scarves. So I'm using a couple of my scarves, plus I've got a crazy palette going with this one. I'll show you as I go along, but I'm using a lot of kind of mixed dark model colors like this and light models, right? So a real mixed bag, but most of the flower stuff is going to be done in reds and raspberries. I'm even using some of my old vintage door swatches. I have some left over. I'm not using the last color of any because I like to save them. But I'm using lots of raspberries and tomato colors for the flowers against the background of some real dark color changers and then the challis wool scarves. So we'll see what happens. And I'm outlining it all in this color that I dyed yesterday. If you're interested, this color is called Red Wine from Dharma. This is one of my favorite colors, Dharma Trading Company. It's a really pretty shade. This is the same color, 2-ply, 3-ply, slightly lighter. So I really like this color as a complement for outlining part of it. Because of course these bed rugs have the potential to be very, very tricky designs, very complicated. I'm not saying that they're not great if you're still a beginner. You just take more time. It's just more loops to pull up, isn't it? Be a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more careful about where you're pulling and your color choices, but it can all be done. They're just larger projects. So let me catch up and see. Lynn says, I make quilts, but I can't imagine sleeping under the weight of a bed rug, nor can I. But of course, these are the days of no heating at all. And the only heat in the house, because you wouldn't dare leave the fire going overnight, the only heat in the house is left over from when you were cooking on the hearth at dinner and put the fire out or let the fire go out. So these were particularly, bed rugs are common in New England, but we don't really see them in other parts of the country because you wouldn't want to spend the time, energy, or supplies to make something this large and heavy unless you were going to die of exposure through the night, right? Because it was that cold. So yeah, I can't imagine either. I mean, I sometimes have the weighted blanket on when I'm having a really stressful day, because just to calm me down a bit while I'm sleeping. And even that, I end up throwing that off in the middle of the night. I'm going to start commentary, but I have to tell you this. I wonder if anybody else does this. My mom said this to me the other night. I was saying, I have such trouble sleeping. I almost every morning wake up at 3:15 and I'm ready to wake up. And sometimes I get up and then I take a nap later in the day and I just hate it. I just want to sleep at night. I have so much on my mind all the time. And even when I'm having a happy day, I still wake up in the middle of the night, even with sleeping pills. So it's ridiculous. And I was talking to my mom about it, and she said, what Graham used to do, her mother, my grandmother, she said Graham used to every night in every season rub Vicks on the soles of her feet and then put lightweight socks on. And I have to say, I have done it for a couple of nights, and I have slept right through the night. Now, I don't know if this is a novelty thing or what, but I have slept well when I have had Vicks on my feet and little socks on. Is this like an old wives thing, or is this just a crazy our family thing? I'm wondering, because it could be a fluke that it worked. I don't know. I should have shown you the versions like this because I already put the bed rugs for myself on backing. I'm doing them on monk's cloth because I plan to do a lot of the small areas with yarn or a very narrow cut like a 4. For me, that's a very narrow cut. I don't do 3s. So, and that's the Elizabeth Foote one. So I'm kind of excited about those. Those will be available. I wanted to make them available on at least one, if not 2 more, for the people because there's so many people coming to this Bedrug thing on Friday with us. And I thought, what is a better souvenir on earth? There's no bumper sticker. There's no brochure on earth that can compare to having a great day out, looking at 18th century bed rugs and quilts, and then moseying over to the river town of Essex, where we sit at the Griswold Inn, one of the oldest coaching inns in the country. For those of those who are coming, to have some nice old-time cocktails and some lunch. What is a better souvenir after a day like that than to hook one of the bed rugs that's in the exhibit? It's the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? As Clark Griswold would say, it's the gift that actually it's the cousin that says that, right? All right. I almost forgot 2 things that are really important. The class for this month is, and it is my best class yet, Designing Like the Great American Quilt. It is designing for rug hooking using tricks from the quilter's world. And it won't just be American quilts. We're going to cover Tivaevae, we're going to cover bed rugs, we're going to cover a lot of different forms, but you will end that class with 10, 15, maybe even 20 original compositions that you can 100% use for anything that will be inspired by quilt design, right? But they will be rug compositions. So great class coming up. Make sure you check it out in book. I keep forgetting to mention that. Heidi says in the old days in Europe, they did some things in the night and then went to sleep again. Some people still do that. You know, Heidi, I just wish that life was like that because I remember along those lines from reading the transcendental author Henry David Thoreau used to say when he did his 1-year experiment on Walden Pond, and when he built his little house and stayed there, he was busy all day. He was a teacher and he was visiting his friends. It wasn't like he was isolated or alone. He was in company constantly, except when he was asleep. But the idea was that he would sleep and rough it like on his own for 1 year, which he did. And during that time and through his life, unless he had a teaching schedule or he had proper jobs at certain points in his life before he really burnt down a pencil factory burnt down a part of the forest and bad stuff, and he kind of flipped it. But until that time, he liked to say that the key to life was to keep all of your accounts, everything that was going on in your life, should be small enough to fit on your thumbnail. And that when you woke up, when you went to bed and woke up, you just wake up. And when you feel tired again, you just lay back down and go back to sleep. And that's the way life should be. And ideally, that is the way life should be. Our lives and our schedules are dictated by our personal body clocks. But unfortunately, the larger world does not permit that so much these days. But if you can do it, if you have a schedule that does permit it, you absolutely should do it because I think it's the way that it was meant to be, right? So one more thing before we get back into our commentary, I started a new swatch set / wool collection. I wanted to go very, very primitive. I might be using these on one of my bed rugs. This set is going to be called Prim Cottage Garden. These are all prim colors, right? And here they are here. And I'm going to be offering them as individuals. See, the colors never look good on camera. We've got some dark lights, dull brights. We've got some really pretty light colors, some earthy colors. This is like a light yellow lime. This is like a mustard seed, a lilac, some shades of pink, and then these are all rose terracotta colors. So you can look at those online. I haven't got that listing up yet. It's maybe easier to see them that way. But those are the color, a nice green and a lighter version of it here. Right, this is the same one, but a lighter version with a little bit of yellow added. So this is the next color set. It's 16 colors, Prim Cottage Garden. It'll be available later today as a swatch set, or the swatch sets are a 16th of a yard, right? That's how big my swatches are. But I'm also putting together sets of an 1/8 of a yard. And you can also buy them as a quarter, as a half, as many yards, if you find a color that you really like. But I think for spring and for people who like primitive, this is a really good set to be looking at. So be looking out for that later. Let's go. All right, so back to Old Lyme and where we left off on Monday. Monday. I have had some better days since Monday. I am very happy to report. Man, do I lose it sometimes. All right, let's see. Where did we leave off? We left off, it looks like on page 7, we left off with hemming. Did we leave off with hemming? That sounds right. Because we did Hassam, right? We did Child Hassam. We sure did. We looked at some of his the beautiful church that he did. Oh, his women, the goldfish. Remember the woman holding the goldfish bowl? So let's pick up there, and then I want to show you this book a little bit, because for those of you that are going and for those of you who can't come, this is the closest that you will get to actually living in those days in the early 20th century, being one of these artists coming from New York City, going to the Florence Griswold house for companionship, for fun, for painting opportunities, subjects that you don't get in the urban areas, for games in the evening on the sofa, for drinks and stories and laughs. What a time, right? What a time. So we left off with, I'm going to change screens with you here. And, oh, Karen says, are you trying to use the original colors for the bed quilts? Karen, no. The reason is many of these bed quilts are completely lost. Some of them will be at the museum, and that's why I'm really excited to see this exhibit, because I don't know which ones. And I don't mean to be a trash pig talker, but if you remember, I was in touch with, and I need to be in touch with the Wadsworth Museum again, the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, because they did a bed rugs exhibit in 1972. And I'd got in touch with them a couple of times recently to say, do you still have the bed rugs? Are they in storage? Will they be out again soon? This is before Florence Griswold mounted this show. And they kept coming back to me with the answer, many of them are lost. We don't know where they are. And I don't mean to make that, to imply that that was negligent or that there's a problem, but that's where they last were, and some of them were owned by the Atheneum. So it made me wonder, and I continue to wonder, where are they? So for that reason, some of the most recent photos we have of some of these rugs are actually in black and white, which is crazy, but they are. Or they're black and white and they were taken more recently, so they're brown and yellow. So other than the ones that are very clear, like the Elizabeth Foote rugs that are often blue and white, like almost Delft colors, all of the bed rug pictures that I'm seeing for the most part, there's only probably 15 of them, so I would say 12 of them are either black and white or brown and white or brownish yellow. And the others are the Elizabeth Footes that are blue and white. So I don't have a good feel at all for the true colors of the rugs. And for that reason, I'm really excited to take really good, well-lit photos of the ones that are there. And later, I'll try to match them with the ones that I know in black and white were in the Wadsworth Atheneum exhibit in 1972. So it's tricky, but yeah. And the ones that are colored, I have a feeling that there is a lot of brown because of the color that people would wear in those days, kind of all drab colors with no balance. So while I might pull a little bit from the original palettes, I'm probably going to try to figure out, I don't know if we have the opportunity on Friday to look at the reverse of them. I'd really like to see what the original colors are, if we're able to, if it's just brown, 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 and more brown, or blue and white, or if there's anything else for us color palette wise on that. And whatever I find out, because color is like my number one thought in going on Friday. That's like the angle that Scooby-Doo wants to investigate the most. Whatever I find out about color, I will definitely let you know. I might still do mine differently, but at least I can nail down a color palette so that if people want to do them very authentically, then you can. And maybe that's even more magical, I can't help but thinking even Elizabeth Foote, if she had more colors, she might go for more colors. It's hard to say, isn't it? It'll be so fun to find out. Oh my gosh, Lynn says the Vicks works great for colds. For colds, it does work great. But I did not know about the foot thing, and it has been a joy. It's like I'm pulling the thing and I'm getting triple cherry, so I'm going to keep doing it as long as I'm sleeping. Linda says, you'll be sharing so much beauty on your visit. Definitely. Definitely I will. I'm going to record as much as they will let me live. I'm going to definitely take lots of pictures for people who don't like live, because live comes on through our Facebook group, which is Rug Cooking and Punch Needle Club. But I will get as much content as I can. I emptied out my phone yesterday, so I have tons of room on it. I'll get as much content as I can, and I'll share as much as I can, not just the bed rugs, but the quilts, right? We want to see both. It's going to be a great exhibit. Hey, Susie. So let me come back over here to, we were looking at, remember when we left off, we were telling the story about Harry Hoffman and Beatrice, and how she was sent to the house by her mother, who thought that it was still a boarding house for girls. And he went for the summer because he thought he was done with girls and he wasn't gonna have to meet anymore. And that kind of backfired. That's where we ended off. So it looks like now we are on. Yeah, we're actually on this artist. I haven't covered him yet. Hold on one second while I juggle some papers. This is Howe, Howe. Oh, wait a minute. I'm just on the wrong page. All right, I got it. William Henry Howe. Um, he's such like an intellectual, kind of Parisian-looking artist, isn't he? So he's born in 1846 in Ravenna, Ohio, and he dies in 1929 in Bronxville, New York. He's an American painter. He also studied in Paris, in Normandy, specialty scenes from rustic life. I'm going to show you some of his work. He's one of the artists that's associated with the Florence Griswold house. If you didn't catch the Monday episode, that's what we're doing today, is concluding who are the most famous Impressionist American artists who boarded at the Florence Griswold house, which is where the Bed Rugs and Quilts exhibit is. So it's not just that there's exhibits there, it's that this house has this long, rich, and important history of American Impressionism. And that's what I want to cover, so that those of you, whether you're coming or not, if you're interested, you get an eyeful and a heartful of interest and information that you can go down the rabbit's hole with later if you want to. This is a Howe picture called Cows Lying. So I'm just reading a little bit about him. He got awards like at the Paris Salon in 1888. More of a tonalist painter, if you remember that discussion from Monday. He got a lot of awards. Also in Buffalo at the Pan Am Exposition of 1901 in Buffalo, New York. He was part of the Old Lyme art community. He's the one that's called Uncle because his nephew began coming. And when the nephew began coming, they had a similar name. So he became known as just Uncle. He did this kind of subject, right? A little bit of brightness. You can see a little bit of impressionism and light coming into an otherwise fairly traditional 1900 for this time, right? Lime pasture, again, it has that kind of, I don't want to say old fashioned because it was the style, old masters feel to it, right? But the sky is brightening up and the colors are brightening up. And this is where art is headed, right straight toward Impressionism. I had to include this photo too. It's of him around the same time, but painting in his studio in New York. I just thought it was a beautiful moment, right? Looking at his furniture, looking at the size, the scale of the cow painting that he's working on. There was a school of painters who were just known as cow painters. And Matilda Brown, who we covered on Monday, she was one of them. Cow painting was a big thing. And I'm going to add here, I know these crazy asides that I do are why our episodes are so long lately, but maybe you know this already. It's just an interesting piece of trivia if you like old stuff and if you like antiquing. It is a fact that during the Victorian period, let's say 1860s right through to the early 1900s, you could get catalogs, or you could send away for catalogs, where you could choose an original oil painting or watercolor or pastel that you wanted. And it would be, for example, two cows in pasture lying down. And they would get your order, you would choose the frame, they would get your order, and somebody would paint it for you, like on commission. And for that reason, it was kind of like they are originals. Each one is painted originally, so no two are alike. But if you have ever had this crazy deja vu experience when you're in an antique store and you know you have a painting at home and you see the exact same painting and it's not a print, it's a painting, it's probably that. Because that era of painting on commission, on demand, through send away catalogs was massive. It was a massive business. So you can often at a flea market find a picture that you have at home and they're both originals. And I always think, wouldn't it be a crazy, crazy kind of a hunt? It would be almost impossible, needle in a haystack, but wouldn't it be fun to try collecting multiples of one that you already have that you actually like? This is not what the Old Lyme painting community is about. They're about new and different. But I'm just saying that because one of the things that drove up the interest in acquiring so many cow paintings were these commission original paintings. And they were coming out of the era of that being very, 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 very common. So people are still thinking, well, what would I like a picture of? I'll take a couple of cows, because that was a very common subject before. So we're painting a lot of the same subjects, and it explains why, if you live in New York City, as almost all of these painters do, you really need to come to Connecticut if you want to paint cows, right? If you want to paint them not from memory or from someone else's painting, but from real life. You really need to come to a place like Old Lyme, Connecticut. So let me wrap up Howe, and we're going to move on to our next guy. Hold on just a second while I fooling with. I wish you could see what I'm doing. You'd be so proud of me. It's so complicated. The screen that I have when we run these shows. All right, so Howe in his studio. So let's move on to Yonkers. Alphonse Yonkers. He is, he's one of the lesser known, certainly, of this group at Old Lyme, but he is a masterful painter. He is known for his people and animal portraits. He's the Canadian portrait of artist Alphonse Yonkers assured his place in American history when he painted. Okay, so I don't know if he's Canadian. It's hard to tell. Yeah, he is. He is Canadian. I'm sorry, I'm reading his bio. He is Canadian. His name is Alphonse Yonkers, which to me I would think he was more South American, but he is actually Canadian. The painting that made him very famous is a painting that he did at the Florence Griswold house. And this is it. Oops, wait a minute. Let me get him down. Boop, boop. Oh no. First, this is not the Florence Griswold house by any means. This is a complete wrong idea. This is called Danseur Oriental. This is more his style, exotica, almost illustrative style, Danse Orientale. So this is more what he was known for, this kind of illustration slash subject. But this is the painting that brought him right into the light of the mainstream. This is Florence Griswold at her beloved harp, right? The family harp. So he painted this in 1903, and this is really what launched his career and what very different than his past subjects. But all of these artists that I'm mentioning Monday and today, obviously, and you can check the Florence Griswold website. They have lots on every artist and lots of examples of their work. As you can imagine, during these happy summer times, a lot of these painters painted Florence, and a lot of them painted, obviously, the grounds, but also the house. So we have a lot of very personalized work coming out of this time. This is Willard Leroy Metcalf. Metcalf is a really famous American painter, 1858 to 1925, born in Lowell, Massachusetts. That's the famous mill town. He studied at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, right? So the Fine Arts Museum, Boston, and later went to Paris to the Académie Julian, as almost everybody else did. So he lived in New York. He was, during the 1890s, part of the American Watercolor Society, prestigious. He got involved with Impressionism. So, of course, he was a natural fit for the Florence Griswold house, and he heard about it, and he decided to go visit. So he's actually born into a working-class family in 1874, and unlike just about all the other artists that we've talked about, because he's not rich, he needed a scholarship to go to school for art and to go abroad. And he got a scholarship. He was that good. When he went to the art school in Boston, the Museum of Fine Arts, that was a scholarship. So he was very lucky, and he was very talented because all this stuff for him was financed. He did not have the money. He became very successful. So as time went on, he made money, and he did good. He done real good. This is one of his paintings called Golden Carnival, kind of a beginning of autumn painting, almost photorealistic, right? It's just really, it's even prettier in real life. It has a photographic quality because it's that good, if you like realism. But he was more of an impressionist palette. He did a lot of this kind of thing. For example, I don't mean to like pigeonhole it, but this is his kind of proportion, more of a square canvas. This piece is called Gloucester Morning. Gloucester is where we're doing our field trip in July to the house called Beauport Sleeper McCann. That's in Gloucester. This is Gloucester. This is where the story The Perfect Storm was set. Absolutely beautiful setting. He traveled a lot, first financed through scholarship and then financed through the sales of his own painting. Paris, England, Brittany, places he spent time, Giverny, Algeria, Tunisia. I mean, really exciting, right? In 1904, he resided in Clark's Cove, Maine. And by the encouragement of his friend Child Hassam, he decided to come to Old Lyme, and that would be a game changer for him. The painting that would be a game changer for him, because he didn't have instant success. He did a painting of the Florence Griswold house. Be prepared for your mind to be blown. I think this next painting is the most haunting painting ever. This is the Florence Griswold house, and of all the artists who painted it, this is my favorite version of it. This is called May Night. And he did so poorly. Remember on Monday how I told you that Florence and the other ladies in town, very upper class ladies, right, even though she was down on her luck and had been for a long time, she was still of the class where she was socializing with the finest in town. And they would mount an exhibition in the town, on the green, or in one of the public buildings at the end of every summer, trying to sell the work of the painters who had been at the house all summer, right? So big pop at the end of the season. He did not do well, and he needed to pay Florence for his stay. And he said to her, I painted this, and I'm giving it to you. And she said, this is your best painting. This is the best work that you have ever done. You absolutely cannot give it to me. And he said, I have got to give it to you because I literally don't have the money to pay you for the boarding. And she said, you know what? It is what it is. I can't accept this. This painting is going to change your life. It's going to change the trajectory of your life. And I can't keep it. And she said, if you display it, if you carry on, display it, sell it, it'll all come full circle. I can wait. And she did. And this painting at that time, let me see if I know how much it sold for. Shoot, I just lost that piece of paper. How did I do? Did I do that? Hold on one second. Let me see. Clark's Cove, May Night. Yeah. In 1907, this won the gold medal at the Corcoran Art Gallery, which was a seriously big deal in New York City. Was honored with the top purchase price of $3,000. That was the highest price of any painting. So it did come full circle, and it really launched his career in a lot of sales. And he ended up coming back to the house, and of course, everything got paid up and paid off, and then some. So her generosity in not keeping this piece led to his career being as successful as it was, and it was very successful. So, all right, let's see. Let's move on to, I could stay on each of these artists for a whole episode, but of course we can't do that. That would be too long, and we want to move on and have some fun with some other people. Let me come to, hold on just a second. I'm out of order a little bit. Let me come to Robinson. So he's such a happy looking guy. William S. Robinson. Ironically enough, he's born in East Gloucester, Mass, right? The Metcalf painting we just saw of the harbor, that was like the town over from him. 1861 to 1945, William S. Robinson, super talented and successful marine and landscape painter. His early childhood influences were his family, his relatives. They were super stereotypical, self-reliant Yankees, and he was too. But he was super talented, prodigy style, talented. And luckily his family got him going with painting. He was born in East Gloucester, Mass, but he died in Biloxi, Mississippi, 1945. And his time in Old Lyme, where we're headed on Friday, the Griswold house, was 1905 to 1920. And he actually stayed through to because in 1920, that is like the end of the Florence Griswold story, right? She passes away, and I'll tell you about that in a while. But he actually had a house and permanently stayed until 1937. So 1905 to 1937 in Old Lyme, that was a huge part of his life. So he stayed at the boarding house on and off for 15 years until 1921. But moved in full-time beginning. So he moved in full-time in 1921 until Miss Florence's death. So she dies in 1937. So he lives with her like in her old age. He's one of the first members of the Lyme Art Association, eventually their president. He had a long-term studio on the property of the Florence Griswold house. And for those of you who are coming, we'll be able to see that. It was right down by the Lieutenant River. So he actually had his own space on the grounds. And again, his work focused on the sea. Let me show you some of his work. Focused on the sea, lots of landscapes. This is called Afternoon Light, Mohegan Island. You can see he really is impressionistic, not tonalistic. He is definitely an impressionist.
studied in Paris, Académie Julien again, taught in Philadelphia, New York. Very, very busy career. But most of it spent in, I'm paraphrasing and looking as we go, most of it spent in Old Lyme. Um, Let me show you a couple more, and then I want to wrap up his story. This one I couldn't find the name of. I'm sorry. It went at an auction and the name wasn't present. It was like the remains of the link, without all the full stuff. This one is called Fall Landscape. Um, After Florence Griswold died, he had been living locally at that point. He moved to Biloxi, Mississippi, and at that point, strangely, unexpectedly, not strangely, he continued to do impressionistic landscapes instead of like the stoic New England homesteads and mountain laurel and all of that. And in Biloxi, he started painting in the exact same style, for example, shrimp factories and southern shanties. So for those of you who are Southerners who are interested in seeing his other work that isn't set in New England, that's just a cool aside, isn't it? So again, his name is William S. Robinson, and I got the information on him from the Florence Griswold Museum because he was one of the artists who was quite hard to research. They have information on all artists. I just wanted to do as much original research as I could. So let me bring you to the next artist. Let's see. Here we go. Let me come out of here, and I'm going to bring you to Edward Rook. I just love that name. Edward Francis Rook. He's born in New York City, 1870. He dies in Old Lyme, Connecticut, 1960. Not much at all known about this artist. He studied at the Art Students League of New York, and again, he went to Paris. He returned to the U.S. in 1900, and he married a childhood friend called Edith Stone in 1901. They traveled to Canada and California and spent a year in Mexico. Rook knew Child Tassam in France, right, from his time there. So because of that connection, he was interested in going to Old Lyme, and he spent the summer in Old Lyme in 1903. After living in New York City, the Rooks actually settled 2 years later in Old Lyme permanently in 1905. Rook was very much a recluse and a bit of an eccentric. So it's very hard to research him. It's very hard to research him. Let me show you some of his work. Maybe that speaks better. I like these characters who are real eccentrics. They remind me of my own family members, really accomplished artists, right? I mean, this is impressionist, but it's so different. Even within that school of painting, it's very different. This is called Laurel. Rook was one of the examples of how sort of eccentric he was. He collected cars, and he built a house. He built a garage around the house, like that was attached for these cars, but he never actually learned to drive. So he was a man of many contradictions, having married the childhood friend, did a little bit of traveling, but was very happy to find Old Lyme, settled there. That was his life. This is another beautiful piece of Rook's called Bradbury's, Berrys, Mill Dam Spring. Another interesting character. So here we go. Let's visit with Talcott now. This is Alan Butler Talcott. This is a bit of a sad story. It's so awful to look at a photo of someone who dies young, isn't it? Because he looks so happy in the photo. And there's not a lot of photos of him for this reason. So he was born in 1867 and dies in 1908 at the age of 41 of a heart attack. He's born in Hartford, Connecticut, and his family was a very well-established New England family, prominent, wealthy. He had artistic inclinations at an early age. He was a big sketcher. Teachers, and fellow students really recognized how well and how good he did. He always sketched in the margin of his school books and notebooks, and it was really obvious that he was very talented. He attended Trinity College in Hartford, and he received his diploma in 1890. That's really funny because I'm not a fan of Hartford, but I went to Trinity for my grad school stuff, and it is a beautiful campus. It's funny to think that he went there too, a little bit earlier. He moved to Manhattan, where he studied for a short time, and then he studied in Paris for 3 years. And this is so interesting. He studied in Paris, and then he moved to Arles in 1897, where he rented Vincent van Gogh's house, right? The place where Vincent van Gogh lived, along with the artist Frank Dumont. We covered Dumont on Monday, in Monday's episode of Coffee Time. But the two of them rented Van Gogh's house. I mean, isn't that awesomely amazing? Let me show you some of his work. This is called the Great Oak. And of course, the white oak is the state tree of Connecticut. This isn't exactly a white oak, but it's one of these stately oaks that you see all over the place. This one is called Return of the Red Wing. Little touch of tonalism, right? Because color palette wise, you can see where the tonalism is. You can see that there is a foundation of it, but that those light colors are brightening up and he's moving toward Impressionism. This is this moment in time. This is why this house is so important, because it is the crossover passage moment between tonalism and Impressionism. It is the stepping off point. This is called Lyme Meadow. So this is a local scene. Talcott ended up being very much a part of the Lyme art community, and he bought an estate in Old Lyme looking right out on the Connecticut River in 1903. Around that time, so that was 5 years before he died, around that time, Childe Hassam was bringing Impressionists to the colony. So Talcott had already been painting in the tonalist style, right? And here comes Hassam, and here comes Impressionism, right? It's so exciting, isn't it? And many of the artists, including Talcott, jumped on the bandwagon. Some of them, as we know, didn't. But he did. He really lightened up his palette as a result. So, interesting. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could, right? Remember that from The Sound of Music, that pretty song? So, this artist is Jules Turcas. I love the way he looks, too. I think he's so distinguished, very handsome. I'm getting this information from the Florence Griswold Museum because this is another artist who's a little bit hard to research. Born in 1854 in Cuba, Jules Turcas, T-U-R-C-A-S. He dies in 1917 in New York City. He summers in Old Lyme between 1902 and 1917. That's a good long stretch. Born the son of a wealthy sugar plantation owner in Cuba, he was always interested in painting, for example, toiling farmers and their animals, right? So that makes sense because that's where he comes from. He stayed at the Griswold boarding house beginning in 1902 and was showing his work at the annual exhibitions 3 years later. So what I was just describing, those events in town at the end of the summer, he started 3 years later exhibiting there. And that would make him a lot more widely seen by a lot of people with money in the immediate area, right? He was absolutely enamored with the charm of Old Lyme, and he bought a summer house on top of Grassy Hill, which was a choice location about 6 miles away from the Griswold house. So it really is telling how many of these artists, this is a Turcas painting, I don't have the title, I'm sorry, very illustrative, Karen, so true. It is very telling. Some of these artists come from money, some of the artists don't come from money, but how many of them are actually buying property in town to remain part, the camaraderie, the companionship, the inspiration, the setting. I can't overstate how beautiful the property is. Not just the Florence Griswold house, not just the beautiful old antique, sea captain's house, but the grounds and the Lieutenant River running in the backyard. It is like, if you've ever been to Giverny or been to Barbizon, to these artist communities in Europe, I'm going to say it. This is better. This is even prettier. It has something so hazy that glows. It's like, I forget which artist said it on Monday. I think it was Dumont, that there's always this prismatic rainbow above the earth. Whether you see it or not, it is there. And you just feel that. It's in the air when you walk around the grounds. It is so atmospheric. I can fully appreciate why so many of these artists bought a place in town. So that's Turcas. This is one that is, I don't have the title on, but come on now. Don't fool with me. Don't fool with me. I'm sorry, that was called Island Sunset. So I do have a title on that, Island Sunset. And this one is called Spring Plowing. Do you see the haziness? I mean, isn't that something? Victorians captured this kind of haziness, and it was a bit, it was a bit of a hat tip to the huge trend in spirituality, right? But this haziness is actually nature-driven and atmospheric. It's actually there. It's that prismatic rainbow. So, wow, I get overwhelmed just thinking about this. This is Clark Greenwood Voorhees, another really important artist, 1871 to 1933, son of a stockbroker. Voorhees was born in New York City Initially drawn to the sciences, he earned a degree in chemistry from Yale and Columbia University. In 1894, he began to seriously pursue fine art, which had always been a hobby with him. And he began enrolling in classes, and then he did that sort of mandatory trip to Europe in 1897. And he visited Lyme a little bit before his trip to Europe in 1893. In 1896, he returned with his mom and his sister to stay at the Florence Griswold house because women were allowed. There were rooms and areas of the house that were just for bachelor boys and girls and others for married couples. So, of course, he's going with his mom and his sister who would have stayed in one part and then he would have stayed in another. It's not a huge house, but they had it respectable, obviously, or nobody would have gone, not even artists, because these artists wanted to be respectable. They would never be staying in some kind of a harem situation. So many of Voorhees' paintings depict old Lyme prospects. Bermuda scenes are also common because his family always wintered there. So every winter in the Bahamas, the rest of the year in Old Lyme, not so bad. He also did a lot of painting of Newport, Rhode Island, and western Massachusetts, like the Berkshires, because his wife was from Lenox. So let's look at some of his work. He really is one of the big names. If you don't know this name, maybe check it out. He's like Metcalf. He's one of the big names, right? He's right up there with Hassam. So he's a name that if you're interested in his work, you should check out because there's a lot of it and there's a lot to know. This is a picture of the Florence Griswold house, I think, called Moonlight Mystery. It's white and the house is yellow, so I'm not sure, but it sure looks like the house. Maybe just that bit of a change. Moonlight Mystery. And here comes Essex Harbor. So beautiful. When we do our field trip to the other two houses in July, it's Essex overlooking the harbor where I'm going to be having dinner after the event. And I have that written up in the description. We'll talk more about that later, but this is the view from there. Absolutely stunning. This is a piece by Voorhees called Hartley House. Voorhees is spelled Voorhees. Hartley House. Really? I mean, God, doesn't it just make your heart ache, for another time, another place, a dream, something forgotten? It's like this place, but you forgot. This place too, to me, it's like, God, I feel like I've been there. This is in pastel, but I forgot. And it's like, it's so good to see it again, although I've never been there. Beautiful. I think this is like a Dutch colonial style. Beautiful. So he worked in many mediums, super talented, another very important artist from the bag of tricks. I'm going to bring you next to Henry Cook White. Oh, I use this image for Henry Cook White. Another person who was very, very hard to research. This is actually Cook White standing in the water. Very nice house, right? He comes from money. He's born in Hartford. He passed up his father's profession in favor of a career as a noted painter, writer, art teacher. Not a lot known about his family, but the website called www.thewhitesofwaterford, Connecticut, ct.com, has their entire family history and some beautiful family photos and a lot about his painting. So whereas it's very hard to research him, it seems like somebody in his family currently has a website up that is all about the entire family. And of course, he's a big part of that, Henry Cook White. So here he is with his two grandkids, teaching them how to row in what looks like an old box or something. I just thought this picture was so charming. Very hard person to research, but thank God for that website. Almost photographic realism. Cows grazing in a river landscape. Imagine how bright and different this was after the tonalism. I mean, imagine people looking at this and thinking, wow, this is like, I don't know if at this point there are color photos, but I'm trying to think if there would have been. No, there wouldn't have been. Of course there wouldn't have been, right, in the 1900s. We're squarely in black and white. What am I thinking? This must have been just astonishing for people to look at, right? I mean, you can see why he would be so successful because moving toward color photography, at least, people would have wanted to see this. This would have been like being there. These are the kinds of pictures that really transport. So this is Henry Cook White. Really realistic, very descriptive photos. Sorry. God, that's how good they are. Paintings. This is Carlton Wiggins. Another great story here. So this is we're going to talk about a father and son team. Carlton Wiggins is the dad. His life is 1848 to 1932, American landscape and cattle painter. He was born in Turner, which is Orange County, New York, studied in New York City, National Academy of Design, went to Paris, ended up coming back and settling in New York, doing a lot of landscapes, tonalist, right, rich, low-toned color scheme, definition of tonalism, more or less, that often contained cattle that were very solid and realistically portrayed, right? So he comes to the Lyme community as a tonalist. Let's just look at some of his work. Tonalism, right? So he fits in perfectly with Henry Ward Ranger and the tonalists who are here. This is the kind of work that he's doing, very distinguished, very desirable. That was called In a Pool. This one's called Pasture Lot. And again, this speaks to that idea earlier in the episode about some people were cattle painters. That was it. Evening after the shower, we got some variety here with some sheep. Now, get ready for a real game changer because Guy, G-U-Y, Carlton Wiggins is his son, 1883 to 1962. He becomes the president of, he loves Lyme, right? He comes here with his dad, president of the Connecticut Academy of Fine Arts, member of the Old Lyme art community. He lives in New York. He spends a lot of time in Old Lyme. He's actually born in Brooklyn. And again, he comes with his dad to the community. He's been traveling around with his dad all over New England, painting streams, fields, woodlands, everything, all seasons of the year. When he arrives at Lyme, he is the youngest member of the community, right? Because he's Carlton Wiggins' son. So he's quite young, but he's already quite distinguished and very accomplished. Wait till you see, let me show you a picture of him. He is, I'm not going to start, but stop it, right? He's super handsome. I mean, my God. So this is Guy Carlton Wiggins, not to be confused with Carlton Wiggins. And he loves Lyme. He settles in Lyme. He's got a place in New York. And I want to show you because you're going to be blown away with how different his work is. Being influenced by the Florence Griswold house and the Impressionists, how different his world and his work is from his dad's, right? And this is pretty much what he does 90% of the time. Winter in New York City. Wait a minute, I'm just getting ready to change scenes. And I didn't get the names of all these. I'm doing like a slideshow of like city sidewalks, busy sidewalks. I mean, it's just so many. Every part of New York City, Guy Carlton Wiggins, if you want to look at 100, each special, each amazing, each unique, corners of New York City in the snow. I mean, this is so different than his dad. I made a little montage of them. This beautiful one, doesn't this remind you of like 1950s era? I mean, this is, I think, Washington Square, but it looks almost like Paris, right? Like the L'Arc de Triomphe, but this is Washington Square. Total yowza, right, Karen? I mean, it's just, this is a moment in time, too, because he lives to 1962. So he is painting this Parisian-looking woman of the 1950s, but he's painting her in the snow in New York. And here he is as a much older man painting. And it looks at this point like he's painting the White House. He was super patriotic. He also painted, Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, in 1959, and he gave that to the White House. I had a hard time finding that painting online of Eisenhower. I'm just checking he did a portrait of Eisenhower, so I didn't immediately see that online. I'm going to have to look again because I'd love to see that. So he was that caliber of an artist, right? And he also was painting the White House here. Really amazing. He went on vacation in 1962 to St. Augustine, Florida at the age of 80, and he died on vacation. And it's kind of sad because his places of his heart were New York City and Old Lyme. But hey, dying on vacation, I guess it could be worse, right? Great story there. And Cullen Yates, this is the next artist. First name Cullen, last name Yates, Y-A-T-E-S, just like the poet. Landscape, still life painter, rivers, coastal scene, villages, flowers, everything. His life is between 1866, born in Bryan, Ohio, and he dies in Shawnee, Pennsylvania in 1945. He maintained a studio always in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. So on a lark, Cullen Yates, who was originally named Owen, decided not to travel to Europe during the summer of 1900, but instead he decided to join a band of artists who were heading up to Connecticut to stay at this place called the Florence Griswold House. And he was not an intimate friend of any of them, certainly not of Henry Ward Ranger. He was new. He was more of a friend of a friend, but he went there and he became an unexpected pioneer of the community. So needless to say, he kept coming back. He stayed. He loved it. He went to the Academy of Design in New York at the age of 25. His life centers around Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and New York. I'm just looking at his thing to see if there's anything else I should say, but I want to speed up a little bit too. Cullen Yates is an important painter. He is one of the well-known painters for sure. Rocky Coastal, right? So that's Cullen Yates. And this is called Cape Ann. This is where our next field trip is in July, Cape Ann. So that's Cullen Yates, and that wraps up our look at there's more than 100 artists that participated in the boarding house and in this moment in history, and they are represented on Friday at the Florence Griswold House. But those are the ones that really stand out in terms of being very central, right, to Impressionism and to that community. But I have not yet spoken about the most important person, and that is Florence Griswold herself. This episode is going to run way over, so I will just warn you of that. I want to show you some pictures of her because she is a whole story in and of herself. I haven't had time to find out whether whether there's a biography, not a biography, but a biography. There could be, right, on her. This is her as a very young woman. I mean, how gorgeous is this woman? This is Florence Griswold. She was born in December 25th, Christmas 1850, and she passed away December of 1937. She was obviously resident of the Old Lyme community. It was her house. I'm just looking through this. Her dad, I think I've mentioned this before, was like a sea captain, and they were a very wealthy family in the town of Old Lyme. But hard times fell upon them, and the house fell into disrepair. After her parents were gone, she was in the house, and she had to figure out what to do to be able to survive. So she started running it, as I said on Monday, as a girls' boarding house, and then came up with the idea of using it as, when Henry Ward Ranger started visiting, he started bringing artists, and she thought, you know what, I think this is more of a full-time thing. I think we can turn this into something real viable. And she did. She really did. Because everybody knows, and everybody in art knows the Florence Griswold Museum. It's such a big deal. This is her as an older woman sitting in the dining room, and behind her, I'll show you on Friday, are panels. All of the artists who stayed at the boarding house were encouraged and offered to paint a panel. It had like tons of wainscoting in the dining room, either on the doors or on the wall. Eventually, all the walls were filled and the doors. You can see over her left shoulder, the door isn't painted yet. But at one point, all of the paneling is just absolutely covered. One of her great quotes was, she said 1937, "So you see, first the artists adopted Lyme, and then Lyme adopted the artists. And now today, Lyme and art are synonymous." I always get choked up. What is wrong with me? So here is a picture of some of these artists on the front porch. Oh my God, right? You can see there's a cat in the window here. There was a major cat problem because cats were breeding by the dozens. Absolutely crazy. Hey, Denise, good to see you. This is Child Hissam right here. I don't recognize, I'd have to look at the pictures again to identify the others. I think this is, I think that's Voorhees. We'll have to look back and see, but that's definitely Hissam. He's very recognizable. This is the house itself, the interior as it is today. I'll take some more pictures that are our own. So this is where the guys and girls would have come in the evening. There's the famous harp in the corner. This is where they would have had their games, had their fun, been relaxing. This is the dining room, and you can see panels painted on the walls. This is where they would have had their meals, except in the fine weather. They always tried to at least have breakfast outside in the summer, and of course it was the summer, as long as the weather was all right. This is what the house looks like. So beautiful, isn't it? And I just want to point out, every summer
every winter, every Christmas at the Florence Griswold house, they have an annual pallet tree. And that means that local artists are invited to paint an actual wooden artist palette. There are trees and trees, there are rooms of Christmas trees with this many pallets on them. And then there's an auction, and it's to raise funds, obviously. So this is one of the past pallet trees. I try to go every year. This year I didn't make it. I think I went the year before and saw the pallets. They're so beautiful, and every year, of course, they're different. Something else to look up, the Griswold House Pallet Tree Exhibit, every December. This is a group of the artists outside playing horseshoes in the backyard, right? They had a whole horseshoe, whatever it's called, field, something, whatever the word is, set up permanently. This is some of the artists painting outside. This is what you would walk into. If you were one of them, man or woman, this is what you would walk into. There they are, just set up there doing their thing. And sometimes they would take a trip to the beach or somewhere, and they would come in this little trap, and the horse would take them away. And this was it. This is them rolling off into the day. And see, one of the artists is joking around on the back with the horn. People who are there with their wives, right? You wouldn't go with your girlfriend, but if you're there with your wife, she comes too. I mean, what a moment in time. And Woodrow Wilson and his wife spent a lot of time in Old Lyme too, because she was studying there and he was her spouse, so she went. They played a game at night called the Wiggle Game. And I want to show you some of the products of these because they're so cool. This one was done by Louis Cohen. The Wiggle Game is when somebody draws, and it's in blue here. So look at the lines in blue. Somebody draws some lines on a piece of paper and passes it to someone else, and they have to complete the drawing. This is the caliber. This is like monks reading a scroll. This is the caliber of work that people were doing for fun in the evening while they were probably intoxicated. It was a dry town at that time, but of course there was alcohol everywhere. It was usually the doctor who went and bought booze if someone needed booze. You can see this one, the wiggles are done in red. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 wiggles. And this one is executed by Talcott, Alan Talcott. So he does the man with the pig. Here's another by Talcott, a bison, and you see the red lines. Might have even been the same night. This is enjoyment for them. For me, I would be so stressed out if somebody passed me a piece of paper with these lines. I would never come up with, this kind of a thing. But isn't this an amazing game? And maybe something for your next party. Oh, this one's by Foote, right? This is by, what was it, William Foote. Yeah, William Foote. Isn't that beautiful? It's the simple blue lines that are there and what they became. So I want to wrap up this story. I'm going to try to make this fast because we're late already. But I'm looking at this book now because to conclude this story, at least until Friday, something so beautiful happened at that house that just, I think of it all the time, right? So this is the book that I'm looking at. And this book is actually by Arthur Hemming, who, if you remember, is a Canadian artist who lived and spent a lot of time at the house. He did the real adventure illustrations and wrote 3 very famous books in his life. He's a big player at the house and a great writer, obviously, so he tells the story of all of the artists coming and going. And I won't get into it in huge detail, but he describes in this book, if you're interested, arriving at the house for the first time. And I want to read you the description of the house because it's so I'll be reading directly from the book, but small amounts, right? There's a lot more in this book. He starts the book off with her death, as many good stories start at the end. So it's December of 1937, and he says, if she had lived through December, because she died at the beginning of December, it would have been her 87th birthday. So he talks about her very delicate, hybrid way, because she was from a very wealthy family. Her fostering of authentic American art, how her painters painted her again and again, how many a down-at-heel artist left on her walls panels on other subjects signed by names that were to become very distinguished. So the memory of this gracious and generous spirit lives in the house. He talks about his first sight at the house nearly 40 years ago, set amid the sycamores, the cedars, the elms, the willows, with a little brook in the foreground. He saw that charming house that appeared like a Roman temple. He said he stood at the handsome old doorway, and the door was wide open, hospitality open, he says.
But when he walked in, because nobody came when he rang the bell, he said he looked a little bit closer, and there was a spirit of sadness that enveloped him. He said, when I looked, I saw how decay had taken possession of that beautiful old home. The patched roof, the crumbling cornice, the decayed pillars, the dilapidated shutters, the rotten steps, the broken windows, spoke loudly of the ravages of time. Now it seemed like it was a great tomb. So he goes on to talk about, in very funny detail, it's not funny, but he walks inside because no one's around. Probably everybody's outside painting, right? It's his first time. He says there are 2 old sofas that had gouged holes that had gouged holes in the wall plaster with their restless backs, people bumping into the walls, while their wobbly legs seemed to be vainly reaching out after their runaway casters. Several cats and dogs slept soundly and breathed heavily among the chaos of faded and tattered cushions and ripped and gaping upholstery. A tall, gloomy-looking hat rack with a sprained foot leaned totteringly far out from the wall and threatened at any moment to cast an avalanche of old clothing across the hall. He talks about the mildewy, tattered wallpaper, all of the ancestral portraits that can barely be seen because they're so dirty, pictures of clipper ships that her dad would have sailed on, all of the, as he says, ravages of time, and how underneath the cushions, because the springs are popping up through the cushions of the couches, there are books piled up so you don't fall straight through to the carpet. You're actually sitting on a spring and then a book. So the place has just had it. He says there's hairy padding sticking out of all of the furniture, and it's just like this. He said a couple of sad-looking goldfish were floating around aimlessly, blowing bubbles in the stale water of their bowl. The whole place just had, for the beauty that it was, for the age and the story behind it, all of that, the bones were there, but the house had really had it because of the years of poverty. And it's a great, funny, long chapter describing even the canes in the cane holder by the door, everybody feeling indignant, even inanimate objects, because everything was so in poor shape, right? So finally, Florence appears to welcome him, and he said she was so hopeful. And she said, doesn't look like much now, but there's so many artists coming this year, and the house is going to be crowded, and before the winter comes, I'm going to have enough money to put everything back in order. And he said that she said this every year. And of course, many years the artists could not pay. Not everybody did well all the time or at all. And she would let them come back anyway. And she did not ever get this time over those decades where she could, over any winter, redo the house. So time goes on. The garden, of course, is in pretty bad shape too. There's 3 sort of ramshackle old rowboats on the Lieutenant River for the painters to use, and they are called the Smallpox, the Scarlet Fever, and the Prickly Heat. There are cats absolutely everywhere, dozens, if not over 100 cats. And they actually take to, and it's awful to say, poisoning the cats, because they are just, it's awful. It's another time, isn't it? Litter after litter after litter, because as soon as the artist would sit down to have food and they put food on the table for them, the cats would jump so hard on the table that the table would shake and they would just be eating off the plates. It was a real problem with painting, with eating, with sleeping. Just one of those things, right? Not forgivable, but just one of those things. So lots of animals around. Even with that controlling way of dealing with them, horrible way of dealing with them, they kept reappearing season after season in the dozens. So he tells the story in this book about all the different artists arriving, and you really get such a feel for their unique personalities and their wives as they marry through time. Such funny old stories about old jokes, things that happened that were super, super funny, like the one I told you on Monday about Miss Pope coming and them falling in love. And then there's another funny story about how the writer, Hemming, got sick one day, and he was sick for like 2 weeks, and they didn't know what to do with him. He had a terrible cold, and Florence suggested that he drink some, I guess it's brandy, but he'd never drank before. So she called the doctor to go buy some brandy for him, and he had 1 glass of brandy, and then he didn't draw this picture that night. Apparently he tried to stand up and he couldn't,
And then he tried to exit the room, and he said the door kept moving in front of him. And all of the women who were there apparently were laughing so hard because it was the first time that he'd had any drink, and he did not handle it well, and he did not feel well afterward. But it's a very funny description of that having happened. Lots of stories in this book that are just unique to that group of friends, including one day when he's trying to discreetly do his laundry under the shade of a tree way at the edge of the property. And some of the ladies come and discover him standing pretty much in his underwear doing his laundry. And what did he say? It was so funny. He said, wait a minute. Okay, so he had a nightshirt that he only brought one nightshirt with him that was like threadbare and had holes in it. And when the ladies, Florence, and I don't know who was with, Mrs. Robinson, so the artist Robinson's wife, they were the ones who discovered him. And when they saw this nightshirt that he'd been wearing threadbare, they took it away from him and returned it to him later in the day with lace stitched to like the edges and the sleeves, because they thought they darned it and they added lace because they thought it was like a bit fancier. And he said he looked at it and he almost died because it was his only nightshirt, and he just said thank you, folded it up, put it into the drawer of the dresser, and did not wear it again. He said he just put it there in case there was a fire and he had to put it on, but he did not put it on again. This book is just filled with some very funny stories. Another instance where Florence had, no money, but one day this very wealthy man shows up and he says, I would like to buy, it's not in good focus, I don't know if I have it there. He says, I would like to buy, he's looking around the house as people were allowed to do. It was like a museum and it was advertising for the artists, so people could come and go. And he said, I would like to buy a panel off the door. And she said, well, I'm not selling a panel off. And he said, I'll buy the whole door. And she said, well, I can't sell the whole door. I'm using the door. And he said, well, I'll buy you a new door, and it'll be even better than this door. I'll give you any price you want for it. And she said, because some of the artists who had contributed painting to the panels of that door weren't there. And she said, I can't sell it. This was a gift by these artists. I can't sell it. They're not here. It wouldn't be the right thing to do. And he said, I'll tell you what, I will buy the whole house. And she thought and he said, just name your price. Very, very rich man. And she said she thought about it for a minute because she had been poor for so long. Summer after summer after summer, just bandage on an axe wound, repairs with the furniture and the house and everything else. She was getting old and it was getting hard. But she said, I just couldn't do it. It was her family home. It was the house where she was born. Artists came every summer to this house. They expected it. She said, I just can't do it. And she passed on it. And he said, well, I can't go any further than that. I'm a married man. Because he thought that she was implying, that she came with the house. So very, very funny. But the end of the story that I want to tell you on this very long episode of Coffee Time is that the end of this story is that years went by, summers went by, years went by. Let me get to the good part. Hold on. That was Mr. Wilson from Chicago who wanted to buy anything. Absolutely anything. He was going to give her $1,800 just for the panel. I mean, that's crazy at that time when she was that poor. Anyway, let's see. So Arthur Hemming, who writes this book, he goes back to New York, and because he goes back and forth, and he lives in Old Lyme, and he spends a lot of time with Florence. But he's thinking about, she's in bad health. He's thinking about the house. He's thinking about all of that. And he comes up with this scheme where because she has not taken a vacation ever, like ever. He comes up with this scheme with a family member of hers where she takes off for several months, I feel like to New York or New Jersey, something like that. And she's going to be gone for a good long time. And as soon as she's gone, he starts writing. When he's in New York, he visits the artists who are in town, and he says, this is what we need to do. We need to put some money together and fix up the house for her as a surprise, because she's out of the house. So every artist who had been to the house said, I have got to be in on this. And they all kicked in money because by this time, they were, most of them, very wealthy. And the ones that weren't in New York or abroad, he wrote to them, they all sent funds, crazy amounts of funds. Remember Beatrice Pope's mom who built a house up on the hill for Harry and Beatrice? She kicked in a ton of money. People would say, well, let me just buy new beds for all the rooms, like one person. Let me buy all the new curtains. I'll replace all of the furniture.
They restored the pictures. They did everything. It was absolutely crazy. It took months and months and months. The whole second part of this book is almost like if you've ever read The Year in Provence, that whole Peter Mayle series about fixing a house, right? And all the craziness that happens and frustration that happens during that process. It's kind of like that, but a lot shorter. So they are fixing things up like crazy. People are dropping by and they're saying, well, the house looks like this because we're in the middle of fixing it. Everybody who came by said, I know this house. I love this house. I want to get in on it. They got so much money. They were able to fix absolutely everything, mostly the artists in the house. They paid off all of her bills, right? Everything. No more bills, no more debt. And they got everything set. They sent for her to come back. It looks like she was gone for 6 weeks. I'm reading really quickly as we do this. And okay, so then it's time for her to come back. The heartbreaking part is he said that they threw out so much stuff that they could have had a bonfire going for a full 8 days, or they did have a bonfire. I mean, that must have been antique furniture. That makes me feel sick. But it's a different time, isn't it? They got her all new stuff. And he talks about all the people who contributed to everything, the exterior, the interior, the grounds, everything. Everything got fixed. So it's time for her to come home. And she shows up, and Hemming says, they all decided, the artists, because a bunch of them were there for the surprise, they decided that just Hemming would be there because they didn't want to overwhelm her, and they know it would be emotional, and he was the one that planned everything. So he was waiting for her at the house when she got back. And when she got back, she arrived at the door, and he said she looked changed, and she already looked really sunken and sad because she's anticipating walking back into this house with the mountain of bills and the stress of all those bills. And she isn't much, she's an old person now. And she walks into the house, and he had all of the doors shut so that she couldn't see it all at once. And he said she went room for room when she came into the hall, and she just looked around and she couldn't speak. And then she went into the little drawing room where she just looked around because that harp didn't have any strings on it. And it had been restrung because that was the harp she played as a child. Everything was perfect. And I guess he was standing out in the hall giving her space, Arthur. And he said she just crumpled down on the floor, like laying over one of the new pieces of furniture, sobbing, just sobbing. And he said, I think he's a bachelor all his life. She crumpled up into her arms and her head. She put her head down on a table and began to sob as though her heart would break. Instantly, I wheeled around and ran up 2 flights of stairs, 3 steps at a time. For though I've never run from bears or wolves or wildcats, I have always had to light out when a woman weeps. So he couldn't stand it. But he waited for her to go room for room for room, and it took ages because every room was transformed. Thanks, Wendy. And he could hear her opening and shutting the doors, and then he could hear her making her way upstairs and opening and shutting all those stairs. And then she showed up when she got herself together with a very red face and very eyes and said, "Oh, Arthur, I never knew I had such wonderful friends. It's a dream of a lifetime come true." And that was in the early spring of 1910. And then he quotes Woodrow Wilson again, who Woodrow Wilson said after Florence died, because he was constantly in touch with Arthur Hemming, Woodrow Wilson, because he was one of the guys, because his wife was there. She wasn't like painter, right? She was taking classes and they could afford it and it was very pleasant. This is before he was president. But he showed up for summers, right? And he never rolled up his sleeves, but he always took his jacket off, which was really something for him. And he wrote too, and he said, hearing about them fixing up the house, he said, "The memory of those carefree days in Old Lyme is still fresh with me and very fragrant." He was another person who kicked in money, him and his wife, for the restoration of the house. And the fact of the restoration of the house all those years ago is the reason why the house wasn't torn down in the 1920s or 1930s after she died, because it was that bad. So because of the kindness of the artists, the whole story went full circle, and all of those artists kicked in at the end because of their kindness and their generosity. The house was restabilized, saved, went on after her death to be sold as a house museum, right? It was then historically safe,
preserved and has been operating as a house museum. And that is what we're walking into on Friday when we look at, in their new building on the grounds, the Bed Rugs and Quilts exhibit. And then we go through the house for a private guided tour there too. And you will see the art of all of the artists that we've been talking about in these couple of days, all of the beautiful stuff in the house, and the one hooked rug they're taking out of storage that is associated with that house that's not ever on display. We're going to be able to see that too. That would have been from her family, I'm guessing, but not while the artists were there, right? It wasn't super in vogue and they were painting all the time. So something to look forward to. Tickets are still available if you can make it. Tickets are available. We'll be there on Friday. I think it's $17 for all of that, for both of those guided tours, plus looking at the rug. And then afterward, I'm going to head over to the Griswold Inn in Essex, right? The old inn, to have a drink and have bite to eat. And then I'll probably, just so you know, if you're coming, head to the Book Barn in Niantic, because we have a couple buddies coming from Delaware, and I just want to make a full day of it. So the Book Barn is like the biggest used bookstore, I think, in the country, housed in many locations. But we'll go there, check out some stuff. I'll show you where the rug books are. There are definitely some rug hooking books. I might do a live video from there and see if anybody wants those books, because I could send them to you. You know, media mail will only be like $4. I could show you live from that shelf what books are there. And if anybody wants them, I'll just buy them for you, and then you just pay me back for the book and for the shipping. Thank you, Heidi. I wish you could come. It's very far. It's very far from Europe. I know. I wish all of you lived closer. It's just a great day out. But, you know, we'll do it in the future. There probably won't be a Bed Rugs exhibit. We'll do lots of trips in the future. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna be really bold, and I'm gonna ask David, who plans it, just to see. This is like a world-class museum, so I don't think it's gonna be a yes. But because we have a good-sized group coming tomorrow, and I've worked with him before in the past with palette stuff when I used to collect palettes, I'm gonna ask him if there's a chance that we could do our Van Gogh exhibit there, even if it's just smaller in a small place. It would be so great because it's Impressionism, isn't it? It's probably a no, just because they're booked years in advance. But I thought, don't ask, you know, never try, never win. So I'm going to ask just to see. I'm still working on my Van Gogh. You should still work on your Van Goghs. But I thought, why not, right? What have I got to lose? Oh, you know what? I wish you could all be there. I will take some beautiful video. I will take some beautiful photos, and I'm going to ask him when we get there. I don't know if their companion book for the Bed Rugs and Quilts exhibit is out yet, because they were working on putting it together. I don't know, but we will keep our hand on the pulse of that, because when that comes out, that will be the second Bed Rugs book in existence, right? The first one we've looked at on Coffee Time, but this will be only the second one. So if you're interested in the subject of bed rugs at all, it's going to be really great to have another book on bed rugs. So I'm so curious to see what we've got there. I can't wait to see you, those of you who are coming. I'm sending out an email right now for those of you who are coming, just reminding you where we're meeting. The whole thing starts at 11, so we should be there a few minutes earlier. Layout for the whole day and all of that stuff. And otherwise, I'm sorry, I won't be on for cocktail night on Friday, because I just don't know how the day is playing out, and it's like an hour away from me. So doing the tour, going for lunch, going to the Book Barn, there's so many people coming from quite far away that I don't want to just vanish in a poof of smoke. I'm going to stay and hang out for as long as people want to hang out and be fun and be there and have fun and enjoy being together, because there are people coming from a ways away. So I won't be on for cocktail time this week, but I will see you again. I will see you live on Friday, and I will see you again on Monday. So take a look at what's going on Ribbon Candy Hooking this weekend. I'm putting all kinds of new products up. Our new Prim Cottage Garden, the bed rugs, lots of new stuff coming up. And look out on Friday for live. I can't tell you exactly when, but it'll be probably 11:30 to 12:30, that kind of time that I'm able to pop up live, maybe earlier. See how it goes if you are on Facebook in our group, Rug Cooking and Punch Needle Club. And I will certainly send you photos and come live to you later in the day too, while we're there with some of our other friends in the group who maybe you haven't seen them yet. We don't even know what they look like. We'll finally be getting together in person, some of us. So we'll be live with you so you can enjoy those moments too. I will see you on Friday. Linda says, I'm fairly new to Coffee Time, and I must say that this topic is one of the most interesting that I've ever watched. Thank you so much. I would love to start doing more, deviating more often, not always rugs for me, always rugs, but I want to do more with quilting and fine art and other arts, because I think it all feeds in. It's arms and legs off the same body. It still feeds, flowing through that same inspiration, whatever you've got going, right? No matter what we're talking about creating and making and ideas. So I love the idea of once in a while moving away from rugs and doing stuff that's more specific. Because my wheelhouse is traditionally more fine art and costume and even literature. So we'll be more diverse in the subject if it's fun, particularly when it relates to day trips and things that we're doing together that we can tie in all together. So thank you so much. That's encouraging. Thank you. We will have a wonderful time. I hope we have good weather. I will see you all soon. Remember, if this is the second episode you caught, I did a first episode on Monday. Same subject, totally different content. Great inspiration. All great. You're right, Aileen. I will see you on Friday. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Great day tomorrow.